Great, thank you so much and welcome everyone. If you have any questions, please put them in the chat. We'll save the questions for at the end of the presentation, but if there is something you're absolutely needing to know right in the middle of the presentation, please ask it and ask me to pause. I'm happy to do so. So again, welcome everyone. My name is Lawrence Williams. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the education technology specialist for one of them at Oregon Health and Sciences University. And today I'm going to be discussing the topic of bias in your evaluations and how we can address that as individual faculty members and as an institution. So without further ado, let's go ahead and get started. There we go. Okay, so by the end of this workshop, you should be able to identify some of the types of bias, that can be present in your course and teaching evaluations. You'll be able to employ some anti-bias best practices when you discuss your evaluations with students. And an added bonus to talking about anti-bias best practices and having these conversations with students is this is a great way to actually improve your overall course evaluation results and the ratio of completed evaluations. And so I'll touch more on that in a little bit. And then last is the ability to identify sources of information or assistance, such as the TLC, which is the Teaching and Learning Center at OHSU. And so, again, I work at OHSU, and that's the context in which I'm coming from. So I'm going to refer to OHSU-based programs quite a bit. However, many of these types of offices and programs, policies and procedures are going to be very similar to your own institutions. So I guess, have that lens of that sort of translation come up, be thinking about that when I go through these slides about, just because I'm using different naming conventions or the like, is that doesn't mean that your institution doesn't have these types of offices. Odds are you do. Again, so these are, again, the workshop objectives, and we're going to move on to the audience. So who is this for? Primarily, this is for instructors. So this is for instructors who are reviewing their course evaluations or about to talk to their students about evaluations and to prepare them to do their evaluations. I know the term is just starting for some institutions or will start in a couple of weeks. So again, I'm going to talk more about, how the individual instructor can, increase, awareness of bias in their students, and so that they can, hopefully get better results. But the second audience is what I call supervisors. And supervisors are, I consider, anyone who has a supervisory role within their department or school. So like program directors, deans, provost level staff, PIs in research projects. If you are supervising other faculty and reviewing their evaluation response rates, this workshop really is also for you because you as a supervisor, you not only have the ability to help an individual instructor with their course evaluations, but you can also help address systemic issues of bias and racism and homophobia and misogyny in evaluations. And again, I'm going to touch more on that in a bit. But so again, though, if you have this type of role, this workshop is also for you. So why do we use evaluations? And I'm sure that many of you have read the articles in the Chronicle of Higher Education, Inside Higher Ed. Numerous journals and publications state how terrible student evaluations of teaching are, in that they are biased, that they have, the students are all sorts of things, racist, homophobic, misogynistic, the list goes on and on. But there are several good points about student evaluations of teaching. And I want to highlight them because, we shouldn't, just because evaluations are problematic, that doesn't mean we should just totally dismiss them and get rid of them. So this first point, and I'm going to read this out for the transcript. By analyzing longitudinal evaluation data, instructors can assess whether or not a teaching intervention or innovation was effective. So, it's one data point, but it's a useful data point. If you have changed something in your teaching, student evaluations are a great way to assess, like, hey, did it work? Did it not work? And if not, or if it did, why? What made it successful? So again, teaching, that's one useful piece of information you can get about teaching changes. Second, using student evaluation data, instructors can assess areas. There she is. Okay. Okay, there we go. Back in business. All right, let me cue my slides back up again. So for those of you who may have been booted out by Zoom, we're just resuming the recording for this part of the presentation. I just covered kind of two reasons as to why we should continue to use student evaluations for evaluating our evaluating our teaching as instructors. Okay. So, and then the third point that I want to make is that student evaluations provide students a voice in their educational experience. And this is from the NILOA equity considerations, but this, you'll see this through the literature over and over. And for people who are supportive of student evaluations of teaching, again, this is an opportunity for students to talk about their educational experience. And actually students in most institutions really don't have much an opportunity to do that. So evaluations are one way of doing it. Okay, so segueing now. So why should we talk about bias in evaluations? And I mean, the answer seems obvious that bias is bad. We should not have them in our course evaluations. That makes sense to me. I think it makes sense to everyone else on this call. But I want to highlight this quote from the American Sociological Association. They put out a statement on student evaluations of teaching, also known as SETs, which you'll see in this paragraph, back in 2019. And again, for the transcript, I'm going to read it. It states, a scholarly consensus has emerged that using SETs as the primary measure of teaching effectiveness in faculty review processes can systematically disadvantage faculty from marginalized groups. So again, if we don't talk about bias, if we don't address bias in evaluations, it doesn't just hurt individual instructors, it hurts whole groups of people within an institution. And it also systematically discriminates against them. It perpetuates these ideas in that institution. So it's important that we address it both at an individual level and a broader level in our institutions. So the types of bias. So in the column on the left, you'll see a laundry list of types of bias that can occur. And oftentimes for many people, when the topic of bias is brought up in student evaluations of teaching, racial or ethnic bias is thought of first, or gender or biological sex bias is brought up first. No surprise, given that these are two of the major points of bias in evaluations of teaching. But it's not just limited to whether a person is male or female, or whether they are, white, Asian, Latinx, Black, etc. There's all sorts of bias that can occur, be it from sexual orientation, cultural, the instructor's appearance, socioeconomic, in-group versus out-group. The list goes on and on. And the list here is certainly not an end-all be-all list. There's all sorts of ways bias can occur. And also, though, I want to point out intersectionality, right? This idea that we are many things in a single person, and discrimination can occur with maybe not one of these items, but when there's two combined. And I want to highlight, and I'm forgetting the name of the actual study or the incident, but there was a department store, there's a lawsuit with the department store, I think many years ago. And what was found is that they weren't discriminating against women primarily, and they were not discriminating against Black people primarily, but Black women were being discriminated against in the hiring and retention policies at this particular store. And again, so it's that intersection of these types of people, again, because we're made up of many different things, these intersections can also be the source of bias that appear in evaluations. And so sometimes it is overt. Sometimes it's like so blatantly obvious that the student is racist that it's like, okay, yeah, this comment is clearly not appropriate. And they're giving, sometimes evaluations are not anonymous. OHSUs are, but if sometimes this you'll be able to identify the student and say, yeah, this person clearly has a problem with XYZ types of people. But and I'll repeat this later in the presentation, if you as an instructor are experiencing what you may consider bias in evaluations, do bring it up, because it may be obvious, it may not be obvious, but if you suspect something is wrong, say so and talk to your course and teaching evaluation professionals at your institution to dig into the data a little more. And I'll touch more on that in a minute. So now we're going to talk about some of the best ways to address bias in course evaluations. And this, again, is based on literature as well as research and practical application done at various institutions. And I'm going to use McGill University as kind of the poster child of how they're doing evaluations and talking about it and having resources available, because they're doing a fantastic job. So I'll reference them a couple times throughout this presentation. But the first one is to talk about it. Just talk about it openly. Talk about the different types of bias. Talk about how it's not appropriate for comments in course evaluations to be biased. It's not appropriate, period, but it's certainly not appropriate for course evaluations. And talking about evaluations with students, again, that benefit, or the additional benefit of discussing with the students, is odds are you will have a higher rate of return and a better quality of evaluation responses from your students. Because if it's an instructor, again, this is based in the literature, and when instructors ask the students and make the statement of like, I use your evaluations to help improve my teaching, to improve my courses, and to improve the program, again, students hear that, and odds are they will be much more receptive to giving you feedback. And speaking of feedback, give guidance. Guide students on how to give feedback. This is sadly a skill that is not taught very often. I think in the United States higher education. I think we see the ramifications of that over and over when we look at our society. Often not very good at assessing ourselves and assessing others. And so this is a great opportunity to help train students on critical thinking and to how to give feedback. And I'm going to touch on that again in just a little bit. And of course, when giving that students guidance, model good behaviors. When you're giving feedback on papers, on assignments, on quizzes, whatever, again, model those behaviors that you are trying to receive. And that touches on egalitarianism. And I'm going to, again, touch on that a little bit. And so, again, students, if they can see that in their instructors, odds are they will be able to replicate that in what you are asking them. And when you are asking for feedback, let's say you're putting your syllabus, which, by the way, I always encourage faculty to add something in their syllabus about evaluations and how they use data to improve student evaluation data to improve their teaching practice. You don't need to go super duper in depth. You don't need to have long drawn out conversations about it. Sometimes it can just be very concise. And so again, using McGill University as an example, 2 sentences that they put in their the course syllabi. First sentence, be respectful. Second sentence, derogatory comments about criticism based on race, religion, gender, sexual orientation, etc., are not appropriate in course evaluations. Easy peasy, done. You've made it very clear in only 2 sentences kind of what is acceptable and what is not. And so if you let students know what is acceptable, they're going to not put what is not acceptable in those evaluations. So there are all sorts of feedback methods, structures, models that you use, that method, and the list goes on and on. So find which one works best for you. But I do want to stress kind of what it makes like bad feedback or not great feedback, not useful feedback, and what is better feedback. And I think, and these are actual quotes from students and from our evaluations. Oftentimes we'll say say like, this class was awesome, this class was great, this class was us. It doesn't help me as the administrator, it doesn't help the instructor. It was like, okay, that was great, but what made it great? How was it great? And so encouraging students to give, again, give that a little more specific feedback. And this feedback that's, again, a little more timely, like what was it that made it great? And so this one comment from the student on the better feedback line reads, I like the grading rubrics as they help me better understand how I was graded on assignments. I mean, that's actually useful data, to say like, oh, okay, like, the rubrics were helpful. And this is, it helped at least one student with their assignments. I also want to talk about, the term constructive criticism. In that younger generations from speaking to people, in like millennials, Gen Z, et cetera, and also reading research about these particular groups and soliciting them for feedback, oftentimes when they hear the phrase constructive feedback, they think, oh, I need to be nice in my evaluations. If I'm going to give constructive criticism, it has to be nice and friendly. And I can't really say, something that may be, perceived as wrong or mean or what have you. And that's, of course, not quite correct. You can give feedback that is constructive, but you don't have to be mean about it. You don't have to be cruel. You can say, look, like you instructor did something that didn't work for me. Here's an example of what I could do. So let's say, hey, instructor, again, another quote, it's like, the instructor spoke very quickly through their lectures. Could you please slow down a little bit? Because many of us are trying to take notes, and it would help us with our note collection. So again, it's, when you're working with these particular groups, it's okay. You can clarify that for them, because I think, again, giving feedback is an odd skill that is taught. And so when students hear constructive criticism, they think, oh, I have to give a compliment. And that's really not the case. You just don't be a jerk, but give, useful feedback. So continuing on with reducing bias, I want to introduce the idea of egalitarianism. And I think, we all know what this word means, but or at least the gist of it, but maybe not quite the specifics. And I'm, again, not going to get to the specifics other than say that the Google definition here, which is, relating to or believing in the principle that all people are equal and deserve equal rights and opportunities. So carry that further, right? Of, it's like, treating people the way you want to be treated, and the like. I also want to push it a little farther and say, like, egalitarian ideals and say a belief system, if you will, kind of combats that idea of unconscious bias. And so, a real quick paraphrasing of unconscious bias is that, again, we have these the way the human brain is built, we have these notions of how things are supposed to run, and they kind of click into place automatically to help us survive the world. But unfortunately, some kind of these unconscious ideas that pop up are, again, biased, and they can really negatively impact the way we view people, situations, etc. And so I personally think egalitarianism takes that idea and kind of is like the anti-unconscious bias. It's like the good bias, if you will, that like pops into place that says, hey, don't be thinking those nasty things about those people. Try and see it from their perspective, to understand where they're coming from, and the like. And so I'm probably going to mispronounce his name, so my apologies to Dr. Beanie, but he writes, by making egalitarian goals a habit, they become unconsciously accessible and automatically activated in the presence of groups different from yourself. Again, that idea of like, it's the opposite of unconscious bias. And it really helps students when you share this with them, encourage it in your students. It helps kind of like, block those unconscious biases from activating, and gets them more engaged and helpful and, caring about others. So again, it's something that if you're not already working on this with your students, give it a whirl, try it out. I know the organization White Coats for Black Lives is really adopting this model of egalitarian mindset. So check them out too if you haven't already. So from the facultydiversity.org website, it's a great resource for instructors, administrators, and the like on a variety of topics. But many of them are on the topic of bias, about racism, about diversity, and how, as an educator, to navigate these waters and become the best practitioner you can be. And so Dr. Bedelia Richards gives an excellent presentation that's recorded on this website. And I highly recommend watching it. And I'll touch more on that a little bit later when we talk about resources available to you as faculty. And so I want to highlight a couple of the points that she raises in her presentation. And I know, again, some of you are not, in fact, I think I'm the only person from OHSU on the call. So remember to look at this lens of what services are available at your institutions. So first is encourage your stakeholders to take an unconscious bias training. And so at OHSU, we have the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. And it's a great resource for everyone at OHSU, not just faculty. But OHSU has done a real push to get all of its employees, every single one, to take an unconscious bias training. And so again, talking about egalitarianism versus unconscious bias, you really want your stakeholders to be aware of this issue, because if they are not aware and not and having this mindset of when they look at their evaluations, your evaluations, odds are they are going to miss bias that is coming up. And so you really want to get them engaged as best you can. And if they haven't taken this, and if they're resistant, talk to your dean. And if the dean is resistant, talk to your provost. I mean, because this really, again, this addresses systemic bias in your institution by raising these issues. So the next bullet point is to request peer observations. And, I encourage this just period, from time to time, because it's another data point you can use to assess your teaching practice. And so, from time to time, ask one of your colleagues in your department or from another department or whomever you trust to give you good feedback to sit in on your class. And, in this era of Zoom and WebEx and the like, it might be even easier for them to be a fly on the wall, so to speak, in that virtual setting. But a caveat to this is to remember that just because you're getting an observation from a peer does not mean that they are immune to bias. And so keep that in mind when you're reviewing their observations, because you know what, they may be biased too. And so just have that notion in mind if you're going to have peers assess your courses. And I mentioned earlier kind of the idea of improving your teaching practice. And, we all have room to improve. And so if you're reading your evaluation results and let's face it, maybe your students are telling you need to, hone your teaching skills. That's okay. Participate in professional development activities at your institution that are available for teaching. Again, the Teaching and Learning Center at OHSU, that's what we do. And so I'm sure at your institutions, there are similar bodies. I know at PSU, our kind of sister organization is, I think, the OIA, and forgive me, I can't remember the acronym for it, but something about Office for Innovation and something else, an assessment maybe. And they offer many services to faculty, and one of which is to, again, help them be better instructors. And so take advantage of those resources. And so I had this slide. That's me, if you haven't pieced that together. Back when I had much more hair, not much, but I add this slide because with every evaluation system, be it, we use at OHSU this tool called Blue. I know there's tools like CourseEval, and there's a whole laundry list of other evaluation systems that colleges and universities use. But end of the day, there is a human being pressing the button to make evaluations go out to students and to receive the data, and then to send that data to faculty, to administrators, deans, provosts, et cetera. And so my point is that there's human beings behind all this. Talk to these human beings, get to know them, because these folks typically are going to be I would hope, very helpful in helping you find your evaluations, interpret your evaluations, and address any concerns with your evaluations. And so this is just again just some of this additional services in addition to me just again pushing out evaluations and then receiving the data. I can fix technical issues that come up with your evaluations. Let's say you have a co-instructor that's not present in your evaluations. You should really know who the evaluation manager is so you can alert them right away to fix the problem. I can also help find faculty's evaluation reports. If you've been teaching for over a decade and you're going up for promotion and tenure, sometimes it can be hard to really get all of your evaluation reports if you haven't done it in a while. And even if you've missed a term or two, sometimes that can be a lot of reports that you're like, okay, where did this go? And so again, if you get to know these folks, they can help you find that data pretty quickly. Also, one of the services I provide is I help faculty create plans for improving response rates and quality. Again, by doing workshops like these for faculty members and in more individual workshops, I'm able to help provide those sorts of services. And so again, check with your evaluation managers and see what they can provide as well. And again, training, on how to give solicit and give feedback. And that's just, again, something I can offer as well. And also, not only me, but people within the Teaching and Learning Center, there's several professionals who are really skilled at giving feedback and doing peer observations. That also reminds me of the Teaching and Learning Center or evaluation manager professionals such as myself. So I'm technically considered faculty at OHSU. I can also do peer observations because I have a master's in education. So, I have the qualifications to, again, observe a classroom and give feedback to the instructors. So if you're having a hard time finding people to watch your presentations or to watch you teach, talk to them, see what services they can provide to you. You'd be surprised as to kind of how helpful and available these folks may be. So this, again, leads me into the kind of towards the end of the presentation. We're talking about resources. So again, these are very kind of OHSU focused, but you should have these similar offices and tools at your various institutions. So we have a teaching learning center at OHSU. As I know, some universities call it the Center for Learning and Teaching, et cetera, et cetera. But the idea is that it's the office where you can go to learn how to be a better instructor, learn how to teach online, develop accessible materials, and so much more. And so we work very closely with the folks in our library as well as education communications, and so that's the team that has really helped with using WebEx, which is our tool for online meetings and the like. And so we have really good relationships. And that's another thing, that these centers are often great. They can connect you to other useful folks around your campus. Again, talking like folks like me, I developed a Blue information page on Sakai, which is our learning management system. And that's like a one-stop shop for basic questions about evaluation procedures and policies. And so again, your evaluation managers may have similar resources available to you. We also have something called FREE, which is Fostering Respectful and Equitable Education initiative. It's through the Office of Education and Improvement Innovation. And that's a lot of words, and long story short, it is essentially diversity resources for anti-racist teaching and anti-colonial teaching. And that is a living site, if you will, where we're constantly uploading and updating resources. And my colleague Graciela Vidal manages that, and she's amazing, and the site's really, really useful. And again, there's oftentimes at institutions, there is a Center for Diversity, or at OHSU, it's the Center for Diversity and Inclusion. At OHSU, we have, again, the unconscious bias trainings available. We have anti-racist resources. Anti-colonial resources are coming, because I think that's, again, the kind of next step, if you will, to anti-racism, but also the Diversity Action Plan. And I think for faculty members at any institution, it is really worth your while to find out, does your institution have this sort of plan in place? If not, I would really, encourage you all to raise a red flag and say, our institution needs this. Like, what is our plan for diversity, both in terms of like hiring, recruitment, and creating safe spaces and comfortable spaces for people to work. We want and also defining what is diversity, because I think we all have slightly different ideas about it, but we need to come as an institution come to kind of idea of like, okay, what is diversity? How do we see diversity at our institution? And a couple more resources. So, I know reading policies at your institution probably not the most fun thing to do, but it is important, and you do kind of need to be mindful of like, what are the policies on discrimination or harassment or, heaven forbid, retaliation? What are the policies for having to use evaluations in your performance reviews? For some reviews in some departments and schools at OHSU, you don't have to include it, but some you do. So you might want to find out in which school within your university or situation, what are the requirements if you're going up for an annual review or promotion tenure. Also, find out who is in your local office of AAEO, Affirmative Action Equal Opportunity. Heaven forbid you need to use these services, but you don't want to be scrambling to find the contact information if a problem emerges. You want to have that kind of in your Rolodex, at the risk of dating myself, yes, Rolodex, or your contacts in Outlook or what have you. If you have to contact them. And again, I'm always a fan of meeting people preemptively. So like, buy a cup of coffee, have a conversation, find out what's going on. I've also meant to list the Office of the Ombudsperson at your institution. That can also be a resource, not only for you, but for students. And that certainly is the case at OHSU, because sometimes the students need to talk to someone, but they're not quite sure whom. Well, the Ombuds office is a great place to begin. And then, of course, as you can see, there's a couple external resources I mentioned. I talked about McGill University a little earlier. They're doing such great stuff when it comes to evaluations. And so check them out. They're based in Canada. So again, you have to do a little translation from time to time about legal policies that may only affect Canadian universities. But again, they're doing great stuff, really useful information for both faculty and students on how to give and receive feedback. And the talk I mentioned from Dr. Bedelia Richards is through the National Center for Faculty Development and Diversity. And so facultydiversity.org is the website. You will need a membership in order to access, I think, the really premium content on that site. But most, if I'm not mistaken, most Oregon institutions have like an institutional membership, and so like I can use my OHSU credentials to log in and access content. If you don't already have this at your institution, find out if you have this already, or if your department or like the Center for Diversity has the budget to pay for a membership, because there's a great amount of resources there for faculty and for administrators alike. So we're getting close to me ending my slide presentation. So a couple takeaways. Again, there are different types of bias that can be present in evaluations. And so they may be subtle, they may be overt, but if you see something, say something, and raise the red flag and then talk about it with the appropriate parties. Of course, the best way to mitigate bias is to discuss it openly with students and encourage them to be aware of it, and to let them know that it is not appropriate in course evaluations. It's really not appropriate, period, in your institution, but definitely not in evaluations. I encourage students to have an egalitarian mindset when providing feedback in their evaluations. Again, that kind of anti-unconscious bias, we're going to kick unconscious bias to the curb. We're going to focus on egalitarianism. And then again, use available resources, whatever is available at your institution, if you think bias is occurring, and then again to talk about it, because I'm going to end with this quote from Dr. Richards, and I don't mean add it to scare you all, but it is so important that if you suspect something is wrong, to say something, because again, your silence will not save you. And especially in the health sciences, if bias is in our students is not addressed, it will perpetuate once they and continue after they leave our institutions. And in a health sciences setting, bias in the clinical settings, we all know the horrible things that can happen as a result of that. And so it is very important that we nip this in the bud and help our students overcome these biases, because again, it's so much easier to do now than say much later down the road. So with that, I want to thank you all for listening to this presentation. And so I'm going to keep this discussion slide up. I can also, it looks like I can, oh, academic information. Thank you. Thanks, Jeanette. So if you have any comments, put them in the chat. It's such a small group. You may as well unmute yourself, introduce yourself, and ask verbally as well. That's totally appropriate. So yeah, without further ado, please, I welcome any comments, questions, comments, thoughts you want to share. Feel free. And yeah, the folks at OAI are fantastic. Great people, great educators, great technologists there. Oh, thank you, Hala. I hope this was useful. And again, I believe this presentation, excuse me, is being recorded. But if our folks who are watching the recording are like, oh man, I wish I could email Larry and find out these slides, please feel free. Reach out to the folks at OWHE. I'm sure my contact information, I'm going to give you permission. Feel free to email me. I'm always happy to chat about evaluations. I feel very strongly and passionately about evaluations. I know that sounds super nerdy, but I love this topic. I love working with faculty, with students and administrators. It's a great joy to me. So